For weeks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 403 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing okay. How about you?
I'm hanging in this week.
It's a rough week for you, eh?
It has been a rough week. My wife was sick and still kind of is sick, and then obviously I got sick because, I lay right next to her in bed every night, and I assume she's facing me and breathing on me.
Not the good sick either that all the kids use today. That's sick, man.
Oh, do they still use that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think. Maybe not. Maybe they moved on to something else.
You have no idea.
It moves fast.
First of all, your kids are grown.
Well, that's true.
As are mine. Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Jennifer Lemus jump out to our highest level.
What's going on, Lemus?
Christy.
Hey, Christy.
Robert McLeod.
Good old Robert.
Joel Roscom.
Hey, Roscom Knockem.
Spiffy jumped out at our highest level.
Spiffy.
Claire.
Well, hi, Claire.
Nikki Geddes Thompson.
Well, thanks, Nikki.
Brandon Kilo.
What's going on, Kilo?
Christina Sorn.
Don't be Sorn.
Kylie Joe.
Hey, Kylie.
And last but not least, Victoria Summer.
Well, thanks, Sama.
And then we go back into the vault. This week we selected Taylor Aylesworth.
Well, thanks, Aylesworth.
Yes, we appreciate the new Patreon support, the continued support. It all means a lot.
It does.
So, Gibbs, we have a brand new episode out right now on True Crime All the Time where we're talking about Bernard Finch. Headed back to the 50s, Finch was this, prominent, wealthy doctor having an affair. And then, wouldn't you know it, his wife is found dead. And it's really Finch and his lover who become the prime suspect.
Yeah. It's kind of LA Confidential.
Yeah, there's a lot to it because, it's he said, she said. There's also multiple juries.
There was.
So they had trouble deciding on who was guilty and what the real facts of the case were. But it's a good episode. Make sure you check it out. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am ready.
We're talking about the murder of Darren Seals. Darren Seals became a prominent activist in Ferguson, Missouri after the shooting of Michael Brown, after he was murdered in September 2016. Rumors and theories spread that he was killed because of his activism. So, the Michael Brown incident was big news.
Huge news.
And then you have this guy who's murdered in 2016, and we have all these rumors, theories, and speculation. We'll get into all of it. Darren Seals Jr. was born on May 15th, 1987, and grew up in Ferguson, Missouri. He was longtime friends with family members of Michael Brown, according to the pop culture website Complex. Darren experienced violence as a young man. On August 3rd, 2013, he was shot outside his cousin's home. He described the shooting in detail. In a 2015 Facebook post, Darren wrote that he'd just come back to his cousin's house after work and was waiting outside for his ride. Someone he didn't know approached and shot him 7 times. Darren was first shot in the stomach, which sent him flying backwards. He wrote in his post, "At first, I thought I was dead because it all went blank after that first shot. But then as I heard all the other ones coming, I snapped into defense mode. I blocked 3 bullets heading towards my face, 2 with the left hand, 1 with the right. Then as I fell, 2 more bullets ripped through my shoes, 1 getting the side of my foot, the other going through my 2 small toes. I was so numb at the moment, I couldn't feel the pain. I just laid there calmly so the bullets wouldn't travel. The first thing I thought about was the most important person in the world to me, and that's my baby brother, Byron. What would he do without me? How would he feel if I die right now, how's he going to take it?
Man, I can't imagine going through that.
Well, you see in movies all the time where people are shot multiple times. My wife and I were actually watching a movie the other day where a person was shot 2 or 3 times. And she said, how is he not dead? And it does kind of depend on where a person is shot.
Sure.
You can have shots that pass through. They don't hit vital organs. It's going to hurt like hell, but you could survive. But being shot 7 times, that's a lot.
It is. I am having a little bit of Matrix moment there, thinking about how he's blocking those shots.
Well, he's blocking them by holding his hands above his face.
Right.
He's not bending over backwards and the bullets are flying over him, completely missing him.
He's still taking them.
But to be fair, if he doesn't put his hands up, he probably doesn't survive.
True.
Darren wrote that he'd been shot once before this, but he had never seen that amount of blood before. He moved his legs to see if he was paralyzed. Once he realized he could move, he crawled into his cousin's house and someone called the police. Darren spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. It took 6 months for his life to go back to normal. And I get it. At some point, life goes on, but does it ever go back to normal? Now, he said he'd been shot before, which is scary to think about.
It is.
Being involved in 2 different shooting incidents, but to think about like a drive-by where you're just standing outside of your home, you're not doing anything wrong, someone rides by and just starts unloading on you. That's a very scary thought.
It is. And to the point, the one shot hits you so hard, it blows you back. I wonder what kind of caliber would do that.
Well, I think off the bat, you would think, okay, maybe a bigger caliber, larger caliber, but it could also be that, you have a bullet that's moving maybe 1,000, 1,200 feet per second. And the inertia, I don't know.
There you go, throwing out big scientific names.
Well, I'm just trying to think if it is the shot itself or maybe that coupled with a person's reaction to being shot.
Yeah, that's true.
That kind of causes you to, move backwards. According to his friend and fellow activist Maya Ayton White, per the Washington Post, every time he talked about getting shot, he would say that moment forever changed his life. In that moment, he made an agreement with himself to give his life to his community.
I think if you got shot, that would change your life.
I don't know how it's not going to. Now, maybe for different people, it's going to change it in different ways. I think for a lot of people, it would make them more fearful. Others, maybe you start to say, okay, I survived this. I'm going to live my life differently. I'm going to, do all the things that I was afraid to do before. I don't know. After getting out of the hospital, Darren decided he would join anti-gun violence activists. He later became an activist against police brutality. And Darren was among the first protesters in Ferguson after Michael Brown was shot on August 9th, 2014. So we just said, people would react differently. It sounds like Darren Seals made the decision that, he was going to become an activist or increase his activism and really focus it around gun violence and then later around police brutality.
Which makes sense since he was shot twice.
He developed a close relationship with Michael Brown's immediate family and was inspired to co-found Hands Up United, an activist collective. He worked a day job at his local General Motors plant. But Darren was also involved in his community, hosting Thanksgiving dinners and giving out Christmas gifts to people in need. So he's got a lot going on.
Sounds like it.
Full-time job at GM. He's co-founding this activist collective, but it also sounds like he's trying to do some good things, good deeds in the neighborhood as well. Fellow activists and organizers told the Washington Post that Darren was passionate but polarizing. The Post reported, not in the business of earning goodwill, Seals was scorned by many prominent activists, yet beloved by a cadre of local activists who regarded him as a brave truth teller. Okay. What do you take from that?
I mean, passionate but polarizing.
And not in the business of earning goodwill. To me, couple that with, being called a brave truth teller, it sounds like he wasn't going to hold back.
Yes.
And he was going to say some things that maybe would make him unpopular with some.
Sounds like he wasn't afraid to stir the pot.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting that the Post said he was scorned by many prominent activists, yet beloved by local activists.
It sounds like maybe some of the national people that would come in, he wasn't too fond of.
Or spoke out against them or something like that. A post from November 2014 shows his views on activism. Darren wrote, per the Washington Post, caught my first felony at the age of 18 for slamming a cop on his head. Was shot 7 times and had a smile on my face the whole time. I'm a fighter, and I've been one all my life. I do what I do because I'm fearless. I don't fear jail, death, nothing. I ain't asked for the cameras. That's not why I went out there August 9th. Hell, I would have never guessed this would get this big. I went out there because I'm too much of a man to sit back and do nothing while innocent boys are murdered by cops. So obviously August 9th, he's talking about the Ferguson protests over the shooting of Michael Brown. In an interview with MTV, Darren said he was with Michael Brown's mother on November 24, 2014, the day a grand jury chose not to indict the officer who shot Brown. Darren called the decision not to indict the ultimate slap in the face. He added, and for Mike Brown's mother to be right there in my arms crying. She literally cried in my arms. It was like I felt her soul crying. It's a different type of crying. I've seen people crying, but she was really hurt. And it hurt me. It hurt all of us. So he has very passionate, very strong views, right, on how the investigation into the shooting of Michael Brown went down. But a lot of people disagree with Darren's views on certain issues. He often criticized former President Obama for not doing enough to reform police departments.
Yeah, I'm sure some people weren't happy that he was criticizing Obama.
Well, here's my thing. When you take very strong positions, some people are going to agree with you and some people are not.
Absolutely.
The more polarizing the subject that you're taking the position on, I think more often the stronger the support or the stronger the opposition because people are more fired up about it.
That's true.
Darren also supported a plan to send a message to St. Louis County's elected leadership, which was mostly Democratic, by voting for Republicans in the first round of elections after Michael Brown's death. Darren also spoke out against the Black Lives Matter movement. According to CNN, he accused BLM of hijacking the Ferguson protests. Darren expressed his views in a May 2015 Facebook post saying, millions and millions flowing through the hands of these organizations in the name of Mike Brown, yet we still don't see any of it coming into the Ferguson community or being used to help our youth.
So he's frustrated about that.
Yeah. Again, he has a very strong position on a number of things. Many activists distanced themselves from Darren because of his social media posts, which some said contained homophobic or misogynistic undertones. So maybe that helps explain why there were some prominent activists who weren't fond of it. You're not helping us if you're using homophobic or misogynistic undertones in your postings.
So we need to Put some distance in between us.
Yeah, we're not aligning with you. Photojournalist Bradley Radford told the Washington Post his Facebook page shows how controversial he was. Under every post, there was some kind of argument over what he was saying. He was always on 100.
Well, it sounds like he wasn't afraid of debate.
Well, I think you're going to have a debate when you say anything that is even remotely controversial on social media. Hell, you can say some things that aren't controversial at all, and people are not going to agree with you.
Hey, I really enjoy some ketchup on my hot dog.
Ketchup is horrible. How can you even say you like ketchup?
Yeah.
Basim Masri, a friend of Darren, said, Darren Seals didn't just talk about what we need to do. He went and did it. His dream was to open a youth center in Ferguson, one where any child could go and learn, play sports, and be empowered. This is what Darren Seals was about. Okay, that seems like a good dream.
Sure does.
Darren publicly clashed with prominent activists on social media, including DeRay McKesson, a former school administrator who traveled to Ferguson to join the protests and became one of the most prominent activists in the nation. In February 2015, Darren was at a protest outside the Ferguson Police Department and confronted McKesson. According to previous interviews with both men, Darren approached him and accused him of stealing money from local protest groups. This accusation has never been substantiated. McKesson smirked in response, and Darren slapped him in the face. Okay.
Bold. Very bold.
Bold. Also, possibly chargeable. You're talking about assault.
Sure.
In the months before his death, Darren's friend said he was making plans for a boycott that he hoped would renew the conversation about police brutality. Darren also uploaded a Facebook Live video sharing his encounter with the Ferguson police, claiming officers drew guns on him and his younger brother. In October 2015, Darren made a Facebook post that has been cited many times in articles. He wrote, "If I was to die young," and in parentheses, he said, hopefully that won't happen, "share memories, laugh together, cry. If you smoke or drink, light one in the air and pour out a little liquor and lay me to rest." He wrote that he didn't want a big funeral. He just wanted a few friends and family to share memories about him. Darren was murdered less than a year later. He was just 29 years old. So, I think, the Facebook post is referenced a lot because it becomes prophetic. He's talking about, if I die young.
Right.
Well, he did die young.
Kind of foreshadowing.
Yeah. At 1:50 a.m. on September 6, 2016, the police responded to a disturbance report in the Riverview suburb of St. Louis County. Darren's body was found inside a burning vehicle on a residential street with apartments and single-family homes. He had been shot, but sources did not disclose how many times or where he was shot. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported that Darren lived less than 5 miles from the crime scene. It appeared to be a targeted attack. And we've kind of mentioned it already, but Darren claimed he was being harassed by local police, which caused speculation that the police were involved in his death. This rumor has never been proven.
So just speculation.
Yeah, but you're going to have a lot of speculation, rumors, theories in a case like this. You have an African-American male in Darren Seals who is clashing with the police over protests of police brutality.
Right.
So is it going to be that much of a leap for some people to start to think that the police might have had something to do with it?
No, I think it's going to be pretty easy for some people.
Well, especially when it happens in this area, in the wake of the Michael Brown shooting. You've got all these different protests happening. He seems to be in the middle of a lot of it. I could see how some people might, leap to that conclusion. Darren's murder made national headlines. DeRay McKesson tweeted after the news broke, We can live in a world where people don't die by violence. Nobody deserves to die. We did not always agree, but he should be alive today.
And we know they didn't agree.
No, they didn't agree. Now, what he says in his statement is very true from the standpoint of, nobody like this deserves to die. No, they don't. Regardless of your opinions, your views, stuff like that. None of that means that someone deserves to die.
No, you have the right to take a stance on whatever you want to take a stance on.
Now, where he says we can live in a world where people don't die by violence, yeah, that's a great thought. Yeah. I think we all wish for that.
Sure we do.
I don't know how it's ever going to happen, whether it's gun violence or any other type of violence.
Right.
There always has been violence, and unfortunately, I kind of think there always will be.
I agree with you. I don't know how that would ever end.
On the night of September 6th, activists and friends gathered at the crime scene to hold a vigil. They built a memorial on top of the asphalt where Darren's car was burned. Heather Demian told the Washington Post that when she arrived, there were pieces of vehicle debris and shell casings left behind. She said, the memorial is constructed on top of his car door, which the police just left there. You would think the car door would be important evidence, that there might be fingerprints, The police just left it there.
So not happy with the investigation.
Already, and we're very early on. St. Louis County Police Public Information Coordinator Sergeant Sean McGuire said in response to criticisms of how the crime scene was left, our department conducts investigations as professionally as possible in every case. We've reached out to community members like we do in every homicide case. The public is crucial in all of these investigations. And I would say that is a true statement. It doesn't in any way address the car door allegation.
It doesn't.
But we don't know what type of investigation they did at the scene. Did they dust for prints? Could they not dust for prints? The car was on fire, so I really don't know. It does seem like one of those kind of non-answer answers.
I like that.
Or pat answers,
Yeah.
Hundreds of people came to Darren's funeral later that month. His father, Darren Seals Sr., said per the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I miss my son. I miss him a lot. I forgive the person who killed him because I'm a Christian. God is going to deal with you.
Yeah, what a terrible way for your son to die, right?
Oh, whether you agree with Darren's stance on the things that he was saying, to me, that doesn't matter in the slightest. I go back to what McKesson said, where nobody deserves to die.
No.
Especially for your beliefs or your stances on different situations. People can agree with you. They can disagree with you. That's kind of how this country was formed.
It is.
It's kind of what it's based on.
You don't agree, debate it then.
Yeah. But
or be quiet about it.
You have the freedom to, think what you want to think.
Sure.
But nobody should be killed for that type of thought. Lewis Reed, president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, said that when people read about the protests following Michael Brown's death, Darren's name would be part of those records. He emphasized that Darren was focused on making a positive change. So, there were a lot of good things, right, said about Darren Seals. There were a lot of people that didn't agree with him. It was soon noted that Darren's murder was eerily similar to the murder of 20-year-old DeAndre Joshua, who was killed on November 24th, 2014, the same day as the grand jury decision in the Michael Brown case. He was shot and left in a burning vehicle. Someone poured accelerant on his body.
So, similar.
As reported by the Washington Post, there were rumors that Joshua testified before the grand jury, looking into Brown's death. However, Joshua was friends with Dorian Johnson, the most well-known witness to the shooting. His family insisted Joshua was not at the shooting. The St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney's Office also told the Washington Post that Joshua was not a grand jury witness. So that was a rumor, right? That he testified before the grand jury. And then obviously, I'm sure the speculation was that him testifying somehow led to him being killed and burned inside his car.
So similar to like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but was proven to not really hold a lot of water when it comes out that, he wasn't at the shooting. He didn't testify at the grand jury. So I'm not sure how that would have been a motive for someone to kill him and set his car on fire. Police said Darren's murder appeared to be unrelated to DeAndre Joshua's murder. Just seems like they were eerily similar, but could be completely unrelated. County police spokesman Sean McGuire said per the LA Times, at this time, the two homicides are not linked. So I take that to mean it doesn't necessarily mean they can't be connected. They just haven't been connected or linked.
Yeah, right now we don't have a way to put them together.
McGuire did say such cases were unusual, but the St. Louis City Police did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The AP quoted McGuire as saying that witnesses refused to come forward. He added, "We don't believe either one was connected to each other. It's tough to come up with a motive without a suspect."
Well, that goes without saying. But you certainly can see why people think they're connected.
Yeah, because of the similarities. There's also quasi-connections to the Michael Brown shooting. But to me, I can see why a lot of people kind of right off the bat would point to what Darren Seals was passionate about. This activism as possibly being the reason why someone wanted him dead.
And at the same time, we know that there was a lot of distrust with some people in that city, that they're not going to believe the police are really looking into this investigation.
Oh, distrust towards the police?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Corey Bush, a leader of the Ferguson protests, told the AP, "Something is happening. I've been vocal about the things that I've experienced and still experience, the harassment, the intimidation, the death threats, the death attempts." She claimed that her car had been run off the road. Her home was vandalized and someone shot at her and her daughter while they were in a vehicle. Okay, that does seem like a lot of bad things.
It does.
Happening to her. The murder of Darren Seals fueled the rumor that prominent Ferguson protesters were targeted for their activism. And again, why would people not think that was a possibility?
Well, they're trying to show that there's a case for that.
Yeah. Multiple sources cited similar murders that occurred in the St. Louis area. 24-year-old Darnell Robinson was found dead in a burning car in September 2014. He suffered gunshot wounds to the head. Unlike the two previously mentioned murders, this case was solved. Darnell Robinson was driving the vehicle when he was shot. In the passenger seat was Dana Wallace, who later admitted to encouraging his cousin to kill Robinson in retaliation for a break-in at another man's apartment the day before. His cousin Bryant Evans was in the back seat. He testified that he killed Robinson after previously claiming Wallace shot him. Dylan Irizarry set the car on fire and ran off.
Well, look, you can see why maybe they would start the fire in the car. It's going to destroy potential evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, investigators on a lot of the different shows that you watch where, a house is burned down or a car is burned, any place where it's thought that the crime occurred, they're pretty honest in that fire is a good way to destroy evidence, unfortunately. The three individuals were charged for their respective roles in the murder. Irizarry was sentenced to 5 years probation, but later violated probation and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Bryant was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Dana Wallace took a plea deal after his trial ended in a hung jury and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. So, okay, it's a murder in St. Louis. St. Louis is a big city. There are a lot of murders in the city of St. Louis.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Here you have someone killed in a car. The car is then set on fire. Okay. We said the other two were eerily similar. Well, you would have to say this one is as well. The difference is there was nothing about Darnell Robinson being an activist or, anything along those lines. And it comes out once the case is solved that it didn't have anything to do with that.
Some of those sentences seem to be pretty light.
Yeah, a little light. On November 10th, 2014, 43-year-old Antonio Jones was found in the trunk of a burning car in East St. Louis, just a few miles from St. Louis, Missouri. He died from 2 gunshot wounds to the abdomen. In 2019, Marquise Reasonover was sentenced on federal charges of using a firearm to commit murder in furtherance of a drug trafficking crime and conspiracy to distribute cocaine and heroin. Federal prosecutors said the shooting stemmed from a fight over missing drugs. Reasonover, Harold Johnson, and Randall Patton drove Antonio Jones to East St. Louis and set the car on fire with his body inside.
I'm telling you, I just believe that a lot of times it's done just to cover up the evidence.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Because why else set the car on fire?
Yeah, the person's already dead.
Yes. On December 19, 2014, Terrell Beasley was in a vehicle with Dominic Irons when Irons shot at Don McGee, an off-duty police officer. McGee returned fire, and Beasley was killed during the shootout. Beasley's body was found several hours later in the burning vehicle. McGee was later fired from the force after being sentenced to 2 years in prison for giving a gun to a drug dealer.
Some of these charges seem kind of off.
Yeah, I don't know why a police officer would be giving a gun to a drug dealer. Now, it doesn't sound like, he was charged with anything regarding the shooting. I mean, this guy did shoot at him and he returned fire. Unfortunately, it sounds like Terrell Beasley was killed when it was Dominic Irons who was doing the shooting. And you go back to this guy, later being fired. Okay, was he a dirty cop? Why was he giving a gun to a drug dealer? Did that have something to do with the shooting in the first place? I don't know. There just wasn't much in the research about it.
But it makes you wonder.
It does. And I'm sure it makes people question. Finally, on February 15, 2015, Vincent Casella was found in a burning vehicle in St. Louis. He had been shot multiple times. His murder remains unsolved. Several sources also noted that in total, 6 men connected to the Ferguson protests have died in recent years. This includes Darren Seals, DeAndre Joshua, and Basim Masri, who died of a fentanyl overdose in November 2018. 3 others died of suicide. 23-year-old Marshawn McCarroll, 24-year-old Danye Jones, and 27-year-old Edward Crawford. Many believe that Danye Jones died under suspicious circumstances. On October 17, 2018, Jones was found hanging from a tree in the backyard of his home in Spanish Lake, Missouri, a sheet tied around his neck. His family has said that they don't believe he would be able to make the knots required to have tied the sheets. His mother, Melissa McKinney, wrote in a now deleted Facebook post, per the Washington Post, "They lynched my baby. I'm sick and losing my mind, but I had to let the world know what they did to my baby." She noted that her son was upbeat and did not appear depressed at the time of his death. She also told the Post-Dispatch that he packed an overnight bag and left it on the patio, which indicated he planned on going somewhere. However, Sergeant Sean McGuire told the Post-Dispatch that the family reported the suicide when they called 911. Jones's body was on the ground when officers arrived, and there were no signs of a struggle. Melissa McKinney told KMOV she believed her family was being targeted, and they had received death threats on social media. Suspicious vehicles also drove past her house and sped off when her husband or son approached. She didn't report these threats to the police. So far, the police have found no evidence of foul play in Danye Jones's death. So, I do want to go back a little bit, right? We said that there have been 6 men connected to the Ferguson protests who've died in recent years. I'm sure there were a lot of men associated with the Ferguson protests.
Yeah, that was a large event.
It was a really big event. And you have one person who died of a fentanyl overdose. 3 were thought to be suicide. One which is very questionable, suspicious.
Yes.
Especially from the standpoint of the family. I guess what I'm getting at is it would be hard to say that, all 6 of these individuals were targeted. Now, if there was foul play in Danye Jones's death, okay, maybe he was being targeted. We still don't know about Darren and DeAndre. But if they were being targeted for their roles in, being activists, or specifically their roles in the Ferguson protests, then the question is why and by who?
Yes.
Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who believe, okay, well, it has to be the police, right? The police weren't happy. Maybe these people were speaking out very adamantly against the police. We know Darren was.
He wasn't shy about it.
No, he wasn't shy about it. But I'm sure you have a lot of people who just believe that, why would the police go after these individuals years after the Ferguson incident?
Yeah, how does it benefit them?
And, if it is it a rogue cop? Is it, it's hard to think that a whole police force would get together and say, here's what we're going to do.
You'd have to think maybe it's a smaller fraction.
Or, maybe a fringe element, if that was even the case. And then I'm sure there are a lot of people listening thinking, okay, St. Louis, Missouri area, there are a lot of homicides, as there are in any big city.
Sure, yeah.
So could these be suicides, a fentanyl overdose, and 2 unconnected murders that really have nothing to do with what happened in Ferguson?
Just some random events.
Well, I think it's one of the big questions in this case. There are many questions, but that's one of the big ones. In September 2022, the Riverfront Times released an article about a 900-page, mostly redacted FBI report on Darren Seals' activity before his death. The FBI had an open file on him, which refers to Darren as a self-described revolutionary who has espoused somewhat militant rhetoric and has access to weapons. So Darren was under some level of surveillance, but the extent of it is unclear because over 800 pages of the report were redacted.
Wow. That's a lot of pages. You think about that on one individual, right?
Well, 900 pages is a lot, but 800 of the 900 to be redacted. You're missing quite a bit of the information.
Sure you are. Yeah. What are you not wanting us to see?
The file does say that Darren was investigatively detained during a traffic stop on June 8th, 2016, just a few months before he was murdered. The local police pulled him over at the FBI's request. The specific police agency is redacted. The detention lasted about 20 minutes. Darren was driving with a companion at the time. A search of his car turned up nothing. Law enforcement told him there were warrants for his arrest, but let him go. A later addition to the file states traffic warrants for subject's arrest remain active if additional car stops are deemed merited. It stated that the investigation into Darren would be reviewed by the field office's chief division counsel, at least semi-annually.
Wonder how big my file is at the FBI.
It's got to be multiple file cabinets, I would think. But how scary is it to think that the FBI has files on some of us, a lot of us? I don't know how many people.
Yeah.
Now, why did they have a file on Darren Seals? And I go back to that quote, which was describing him as a self-described revolutionary who has espoused somewhat militant rhetoric and has access to weapons. Okay. Well, a lot of us have access to weapons.
Sure we do.
What is somewhat militant rhetoric? That's very vague.
It is.
in my opinion. So again, I don't know exactly why the FBI opened a file on him. Was it just because he was an activist? I don't know.
Makes you wonder, though.
Well, and then you have this traffic stop. And I did think it was strange that he had warrants out for his arrest, but they didn't arrest him. Now, they were traffic warrants, but...
Yeah, they could have arrested him if they wanted. But it sounds like they had other intentions. They wanted to talk to him about something.
Well, yeah, because it's, in the file, it says that local police pulled him over at the FBI's request.
Yeah.
So it wasn't because, somebody ran through a stop sign. It wasn't because of a broken tail light. The FBI requested that they pull him over for some reason. Can you, Gibbs, start to understand why, this case kind of fuels the conspiracy theories?
Oh, for sure.
Because there are some strange things.
You can, if you want to, fall into that rabbit hole and say, I can align certain things and it makes sense to me why individuals feel the way they do about this case.
Yeah, I'm admitting that there are some strange things here. Now, at the end of the day, do we know what happened? No. I mean, do we know who's responsible for it? No, I have no idea. What I'm saying is there are some strange things. Yeah. Is it hard for me to believe that the FBI or really any police agency would make the decision that they're going to murder someone? Yeah, that's hard for me because that's not what I expect to happen. Is it easier for some other people to think that that could happen? It is.
Sure.
Because they've had much different experiences with the police than you and I have.
That is very accurate. And for me, I'm still thinking 900 pages, 800 were redacted.
What's in the 800?
Yeah, it wasn't like there was 900 and 200 was.
Two pages were redacted.
Yeah, no, 800 pages. That tells you that there was things in there they did not want you to see.
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure it possibly could shed a lot of light. But I think the mere fact that, it comes out that they have an open FBI file on this guy, that's going to fuel speculation.
Yeah.
All on its own.
For sure.
And then, it comes out that the FBI wanted him pulled over. For what reason? And then people, might make the leap that then somehow became part of why he was later killed.
Yeah.
The file also discussed Darren's death, saying in part, the investigative plan will be to, and there's a word redacted, homicide of Seals because it is anticipated that violent protests may be generated by his death, as conspiracy theories are already forming that Seals was killed by the police because of his Black Lives Matter affiliations. So I don't know what that word is or words were in that part that was redacted, but it's very obvious or apparent that they were already thinking along those lines, that people were going to throw out conspiracy theories, that there were going to be violent protests because it was going to be thought that Darren Seals was killed by the police or some agency because of his affiliations, because of his activism. But the murder of Darren Seals remains unsolved. I mean, Darren was a controversial person, and there were many people who opposed his outspoken views on certain issues. He was an activist in his community who was trying to make a positive change, although it seems like federal investigators were questioning his methods of bringing about that change. And let's go back to the many people opposed to his views. Well, not all of those people were in law enforcement. So could an individual that was part of that group have been responsible for his death?
Could have been.
You got to leave that on the table, right?
I mean, look, he was a passionate guy.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
And he picked his side and he stood firm and
he let it fly. I mean, he let
it.
He was not afraid to say certain things, some which were popular to a certain population, some which were not popular. And it didn't seem to split along race.
It just seemed like he was willing to go in the ring with you or go to the mat, whatever the saying is. Right? He wasn't afraid of confrontation.
No, I don't believe he was. The question is, was he killed because of his views? Or was there something else that was more along the lines of, I don't want to say a normal murder because there's no normal murder.
Right. Just unrelated to the activism.
Road rage.
Yeah.
Or you flip somebody off who cuts you off. And the next thing you know, they're shooting you and they set your car on fire. In this case especially, you really have to kind of leave everything on the table, even the conspiracy theories. And these rumors and conspiracies, associated with the case, they've been there right from the beginning.
Sure.
Authorities have not released much evidence to the public, most likely because it's still an ongoing investigation. What we do know is that it appeared to be a targeted attack. Someone, or maybe even multiple people, had a motive to kill Darren. The problem is we don't know what the motive was. Right? We've kind of been going back and forth talking about it, talking about the possibilities.
I find it interesting that the police haven't released a lot of evidence, but I mean, if the FBI has 800 pages of redacted information, what makes anybody think that the police are going to roll out any additional information?
Well, and a lot of times the police don't anyway.
True.
In an ongoing investigation. Now, if they had something that would quash some of the conspiracy theories, maybe they might release that.
That's true. That's true.
But I do believe this is, a very polarizing case, as are many, but this one especially, because I'm sure you have a lot of people in the camp who believe this happened.
Right.
You have people who believe, well, I think it might be this. But, as of right now, we don't know. To me, this is a case to follow and see ultimately if they can solve it. And like I said, it could turn out to be kind of a one-off, maybe rage-motivated murder or something along those lines. It could turn out to be someone who didn't like this guy because of his views, not involved in law enforcement.
Yeah.
It could be someone who was in law enforcement.
Could have been.
Like I said, I'm not taking anything off the table.
We just don't know.
We don't. But that is it for our episode on Darren Seals. We've got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hey, this is Lori from outside of KCMO again. You guys talk a lot about this, so I thought I would let you know. Now, this was in the 80s. A lady at the place I work, the gas station, got kidnapped and assaulted repeatedly. She escaped, but then we had to have a little class meeting type thing, and they were like, the cop told us, somebody tries to make you get in a car with them, do everything you can to keep from doing it. Grab a hold of a pole, drop yourself, whatever. Do not get in the vehicle, because if you get in there, there's a much higher chance of you being murdered. And that's all I got. Keep your own tongue ticking. Bye.
All right. Thanks for the call. Yeah, I've heard that too. I think sometimes that's easier said than done, though.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, if somebody's holding a gun on you, what do you do?
Till you're in that position, you make whatever decision you feel like you need to make.
It is the best at the time.
Yeah. But I get it. Fight if you can,
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, if you can keep from being put in a vehicle, yes, you're better off. No doubt about it.
Man, you guys got me again. Here I am, walking down the street, walking my dogs, laughing my butt off out loud because of Gibby writing himself fan mail and putting Gibby and his home address in the return address portion of the envelope, making it very transparent and then muttering, oh no, we'll have to fix that. Having written some fan mail for Gibby, I was like, where could this be going? Because usually it's, just a comment about fan mail for Gibby is just Mike being jealous. But Really didn't. That came out of left field. Also, listening to the Zodiac episode number 2, and you were saying how people think that Zodiac probably had a menial job but was intelligent and well regarded. And I think I agree with the menial job part, but the thing I've always thought about Zodiac is that it seems like a team, at least one other person, because the ridiculous ramblings about collecting souls and picking off kitties as they bounded down the school bus steps and things like this, all this seemed too stupid for the person who was clever enough to make those ciphers to say. I don't know why that's never been a theory, like by the FBI or San Francisco PD or anybody, but it's my theory, and I'm sticking by it for what that's worth. So stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
I appreciate the call. Yeah, I don't know. I lean heavily on Morph, who knows a lot about the Zodiac.
Yeah.
And it seems like all the different people I've talked to that have spent a lot of years looking into the Zodiac feel like it's one person, but that doesn't mean that it'll turn out to be.
Maybe one day we'll know.
It's one of those cases. Remember when the Golden State Killer was identified and how big that was?
Oh my gosh, it was huge.
I think Zodiac will be big like that. Yeah. I mean, it's a case that's been on people's radar for so many years. And, if it's ever conclusively solved, it'll be a big day in true crime. There's no way around it. All right, buddy, that is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.